Something pretty extraordinary happened in 1957. The Soviets shot the first satellite into space, an artificial moon, a Rus moon, Russian satellite circling the Earth. Russian satellite known as Sputnik kicked off the space race between the United States and the CCCP, which is really the USSR. Here, the Soviet Soyuz spacecraft did a docking. John F. Kennedy got worried after Sputnik, an American rocket, kept falling into the ocean. We felt like we were technologically inferior and falling behind as our rockets fell. But still, we knew we had to get toward outer space. That's what Sputnik looked like. By the way, if you took a potato and you stuck toothpicks in it, what would you have? Sputnik! Ah! So, exploring space is on our brains. We become space brains. We have to beat them into space. John Kennedy said that we will land a man on the moon before the decade is out. Indeed, we did. We did get ahead in the space race, but the space race transitioned to something else. The prospect of intercontinental ballistic missiles launched from the ground through space, from submarines, from land-based places, would mean that the prospect of intercontinental nuclear holocaust and nuclear proliferation would become a serious mounting threat, with the possibility that attack by nuclear means is imminent. So duck and cover, kids, because your school day is about to take a strange turn. Number 19 takes us to women's equality, the women's movement, which had several phases, the first major one of which, in terms of consequential things, was women demanding this crazy thing, the right to vote. These suffragettes marched in 1912 in New York, and 7 years later, the 19th Amendment in 1920, Amendment 1920, gave women the right to vote, even though the Constitution said that all citizens had the right to vote, excluding women. And of course, in reality, blacks weren't voting either until, as you remember from the previous one, 1965, after the Selma March. After World War II, women's roles went back to the more traditional homemaker, after women had worked in the war plant factories, as in Rosie the Riveter, who could do it and did. But women went back to more customary and conventional roles as housewives and nurturers of children until something else changed. By the 1970s, the feminist movement was raging, as expressed by this Josie/Archie style comic book, and women decided they needed to be liberated and empowered, but they still don't mind diamonds. Speaking of diamonds, Hawaii was a jewel that we acquired. In the 1870s, we annexed it because aloha to the Hawaiians. We wanted something to take care of our sweet tooth during the Industrial Revolution and the time of imperialism. Sugar and pineapple. The Dole Pineapple Company helped stage a revolution to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani and make Hawaii part of America, with statehood coming to the Hawaiians in 1959. So you could, at some point, phone call over in Hawaii. Yes, because Alexander Graham Bell in the 1850s, marvelous invention, namely the telephone. This here is an earpiece. Listen carefully so you can hear it from an early model telephone. A lot of people didn't have electricity out in rural areas, not even right after World War II, so you would power your telephone by a battery, and of course your telephone would be connected to a telephone line. This one connecting New York to San Francisco directly. Huzzah, in 1914. So it took a while to get the entire nation wired up in the most efficient ways possible, with human switchboard operators making those calls and connecting them personally. Of course, now you guys are absolutely married to the telephone vis-a-vis your cell phones, and Your addiction will continue for quite some time, we have no doubt. Number 23 brings us to the era of post-World War II American leisure culture, where people began to travel in what's known as outward mobility for the purposes of recreation, sightseeing, tourism, and just fun, baby. Take the ship, take the plane, take the train, take the bus, or take the family car and go have a good time. This gives rise to the beginnings of American car culture, as Americans spend more and more on recreational pursuits. After the war frees up a lot of money. The American middle class grows to approximately 62% of the population, currently down to about 47% after these tough economic times. Will the middle class in America come back or not? Stay tuned. We'll find out after the next election. Number 24, terrible, 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 terrible. Terrorists ruled the high seas. Libyan pilots hiding out in hiding out in Tripoli, the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Yes, the U.S. Marines were sent by President Thomas Jefferson to suppress these Tripolitan Libyan pirates from harassing and invading and seizing American ships on the high seas heading to do trade in North Africa. Things got a little bit worse in the 1970s when Ayatollah Khomeini times Ayatollah it is. Ayatollah Khomeini became the supreme leader of the Iranian fundamentalist revolution, which threw out the U.S.-backed Shah of Iran, a sort of pro-U.S. dictator and a friend of Jimmy Carter, the presidency. And the Khomeiniites, Khomeini times Ayatollah it is, students in Tehran, Iran, took 52 Americans hostage, holding them captive for 444 days. Jimmy Carter authorized an ill-fated rescue mission, Operation Eagle's Claw. But the U.S. helicopters crashed into a refueling plane in the desert during a refueling operation, wiping out one helicopter. Another malfunctioned, the fuel plane burned up, and the mission was aborted. America was perceived as weak and hapless, and the country decided that they needed Reagan to make America strong again. Funny thing happened. The hostages were released. All 52 of them came back to freedom 90 minutes after Reagan took office. And you better believe there's a story behind that. Number 25. During World War II, Japanese American citizens, 110,000 of them, who had committed no crimes, were rounded up by the American military authorities with President Franklin Roosevelt's permission. Posters went up all along the West Coast, and people of Japanese ancestry were sent to various internment, aka prison camps, for several years because they might be a security threat. The fear based on racial grounds was that people like Mr. Kubota, who carved his name at Manzanar Camp in the backside of the Sierras of California, might be an ally with the Tokyo Kid and the Japanese Empire, which had aligned itself with the Nazi powers as part of the Axis. Anti-Japanese sentiment ran high in the wake of Pearl Harbor and the anger that surrounded that attack. So we moved directly from Manzanar to December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.